Well, hello again. Welcome to Horror in Detail. Today we are going to share Wendigo and cryptids encounter stories. First story. This story was shared by you/Drove of Dreams. I'm an investigator for strange creatures. What I saw in a forest in the mountains changed me. My name is Reed Delaney. I'm a cryptid investigator, in training. Liv is my mentor. She taught me almost everything I know about cryptids. She's been in the game for a long time. You won't get far as a cryptid investigator, and especially not as a cryptid hunter, without some help. All kinds of strange phenomena disturb the natural flow of everyday life. It's our job to keep those disturbances in check. A vampire here or there can be fought off or chased away. Then there are witches. No, not female wizards. No, not the kinds that fly around on broomsticks with green skin, long noses and warts. And while yes, some form of those may or may not have existed at some point, they're not the kind I'm talking about. We in the cryptid community call them many names. Witches, corruptions, demons, the forsaken, the cursed ones, and the list goes on. They're corrupted by some unknown force or entity. They can be people, animals, plants, monsters, and even objects. For an unknown reason, something turns them into heinous creatures who seek nothing but to create carnage and do twisted things for their own pleasure and amusement. You can think of it as a curse. That's kinda how they get the name, the Cursed Ones. And then there are other magical entities that we call witches, but they're nothing like the Forsaken Ones. They're otherworldly entities you're probably better off staying far away from. They're responsible for many legends told around the world. It's not like we all got around a round table and discussed what official names to call them. Most legends were already called by a million different names before any of us were born. People tend to call things whatever makes the most sense to them. Hell, the guy who's part man and part goat was brilliantly named Goatman. But I'm not sure he's even real. The large majority of myths are simply that, myth. And don't worry, you won't run into these otherworldly witches even if you have the worst of luck, so you're safe to forget they exist. Corrupt witches, the cursed ones, are also quite rare. An ordinary person would never encounter one. An unlucky person would encounter one. An investigator would encounter several depending on how long you're around. And that may hold true for normal investigators as well. And if you're brave enough and a little crazy, you could be dealing with a Forsaken once a month. Now I'm a brave guy, but even I would never fight one of these things if it wasn't absolutely necessary. There's a reason why I'm a cryptid investigator and not a cryptid hunter, though the terms are used interchangeably, the main reason being, I enjoy being alive. The most I've done is assist in exterminations run by trained hunters and specialists. Though, I'm currently working as an analyst to determine why witches exist and what causes people to become one. Again, I don't want to die, so I'm taking baby steps and leaving most of the fighting to my colleagues. Someone has to do it, and that means getting close to witches. There aren't too many cryptid investigators, so we've got our hands full. My mentor Liv recommended that I take on the role. She insisted that I'm just the right guy for the job. Now I like solving a good mystery, but this is quite the ambitious task. Nonetheless, I took on the role without too much thought. If it means we can avoid the deaths of all those who fall at the hands of creatures that don't belong in our world committing acts of senseless violence, I'll do whatever it takes. But enough about all that. Let's get to the gist. The job took me to a mountainside park. The name and location will remain undisclosed. The report I received said that a number of people went missing in the nearby area. Witnesses claimed to see large creatures moving through the forest. Some of the property owners confirmed this. I arrived by cab one morning and tipped the driver after exiting the vehicle. The cool breeze carried the smell of the forest air to my nostrils. I felt the soil compress beneath my feet. A nearby bird sang a peaceful tune while the collective swaying of the leaves formed the chorus. The thick fog completely cloaked anything farther than about 12 meters. Not the best conditions for hunting a monster. The hill was a popular site for hiking, camping, picnicking, and it even had a few lodges. There were few people still on the park grounds. The incidents didn't occur on the property but somewhere nearby. As I stated earlier, many came to camp and hike. They'd often start their trail on the property to use the restrooms, grab a meal, or shop. Those who hiked typically went far from the property. From there I would assume they ran into these beasts we were after. That would explain why the people who went missing in these woods typically started their journey from the park despite all the reports coming from farther out. The thought allowed me to ease up a bit. I probably wouldn't have a run-in with one of these things unless I went looking for them. Thankfully I'd have company when that time rolled around. Speaking of company, when I entered the first lodge by the main entrance, as instructed before departure, there they were, chatting and eating. I only knew one of them by name, Adrian Wood. Adrian was a cryptid researcher in the UK. Unlike us, when he started, he was just like any other cryptid enthusiast and conspiracy theorist. I don't know what happened to lead him to his breakthroughs, but he quickly grew accustomed to the creature underworld. He led a division full of powerful hunters before they even established a connection with the, I guess you would say, official underworld. Over time, they'd built a good name for themselves and had fully integrated into the creature community. That was the start of his heyday. Adrian became a hunter, and with his allies, he began purging the world of its beasts one by one. From what I heard from Liv, it was the golden age of monster hunting. But it came to an abrupt end when one day a witch hunt went less than smoothly and claimed the lives of 13. Many of whom were just as famous as Adrian, if not more. Cara Strong, Kareem Hall, Snake Eyes, The Weatherman, and Damian Lacey, to name a few. Adrian saw me and waved me over. He was an older guy, maybe in his early 40s, and tall with blonde hair and brown eyes. He wore an inviting smile as he waved me over. The other three turned their attention to me. "You must be Reed. I've heard a lot about you. Come join us," he said. "Yeah, likewise," I said as I approached the table. The amber wood-tiled floor of the lodge groaned beneath my feet. I removed the satchel strap from around my neck and put it on the side of the table away from everyone else. Adrian reached out his hand for me to shake. I obliged. "Pleasure to meet you," he said. "The pleasure's mine. I've heard so much about you." "You're quite the legend where I'm from," I responded. He laughed. "Oh, I don't know about that. I'm just a veteran explorer. These are my ments, Caitlin and Zeke." Adrian gestured to the two people sitting beside him. They looked to be around my age, maybe a little older. For the record, I was 20 at the time. Zeke reached out his arm for me to shake. He was an average height, Latin American guy with thick curly black hair and a trimmed mustache. "Yo, nice to meet ya," he said in a sort of silly way. "I'm Ezekiel, but call me Zeke. Or call me Mr. Z. Well, don't call me Mr. Z yet. I'll need to become a legend like Adrian first, but when I do, refer to me as Mr. Z when you're telling stories about me. If not, just call me Zeke." He was so casual that it caught me off guard. For a guy about to fight monsters, he didn't seem all that worried. I guess my puzzled expression was misinterpreted because he followed up by saying, "I'm just playing. If I become a legend, you know, that's cool, but if I don't, it is what it is. I have bigger priorities. I wouldn't be here risking my life for a reason like that." His last sentence reminded me of one important thing for any cryptid hunter to remember. Your life is always on the line. There's never a guarantee that you or the people with you will make it out alive. The realization lowered my spirits. Especially since Zeke was already leaving an impression on me, I didn't want to see him or any of the others suffer an unfortunate fate. It's often the ones that don't take things too seriously that wind up not making it far. However, I know better than to underestimate people. With a little more prying I could learn more about the guy and what drove him to become a hunter. Adrian shook his head and let out a sigh. His expression was the kind you'd see a teacher make when a student asks a question about something that was just answered. "And you're Caitlin?" I asked, turning to face her. She stared me in the eyes for a moment before smiling. I wasn't quite sure what to make of it. "Have we met?" she asked. "Not any time I can remember," I answered. "Strange. It feels like I already know you quite well," she said peculiarly. I didn't know how to respond to that. Adrian laughed. "Quite the eccentrics we have here," I said. I hope we didn't make a bad first impression, but best to put your true character on full display, I always say," Adrian commented. "Can't argue with that sentiment," I responded. I turned to the other man. A tall dark-skinned guy who looked to be in his early 30s or even mid-20s. His facial expression told me that he was worried or concerned about something. "You can call me Jay," he said before I even got a word out. "Sorry, I'm in a hurry." "Well, first of all, I'm the one who called you guys out here. The police wouldn't help, figures, I wouldn't want to deal with monsters either. But I'm desperate. I don't know what your little group here can do if I'm just being real. I don't even have guns, but I'm not the professional, so I'll let y'all do my thing and help you out however I can. I keep a few on the grounds just in case. If you need one, let me know. I don't really care if you have a license or not, just do what you gotta do so more people don't go missing," he said. "It may not be the best idea to have guns during this sort of thing. But we appreciate the offer." "We'll keep it in mind," said Adrian. "Now that everyone's here we should go over the objective though," Adrian said. I had only just arrived after a long drive and would have loved to get settled in first, but I didn't voice my concerns. I'd have time to rest later. We'd be staying for several days if necessary, though the goal was to be done in less than a week or two at max. This also served as a great opportunity to potentially discover a new type of cryptid. We couldn't hypothesize what it was based on witness descriptions. "Mr. Reed, I'll let you take it from here," Adrian said. Zeke followed by commenting, "Hit it, Reed." I quickly snapped out of my thoughts and stammered, "Oh yeah, well first off we need to gather all the necessary information to make sure we're all caught up there on the same page." "J, is that J as in Jay or dash, first initial," he said, cutting me off. "Right. Can you tell us again everything you know about what's going on?" I asked. "Yeah, of course. I've owned this place for almost a decade now. We got a bunch of spiders, but I've never seen any monsters. Until a few weeks ago," Jay said. He looked uncomfortable. There was a brief pause. "When folks started going missing near here I decided to do something about it myself. Can't have any harm coming to innocent folks on my watch," he said. I'd begun to notice a change in the atmosphere. I searched all through these woods and found nothing but spiders, spiders, and more spiders. The farther out I went, the more spiders there were. Cellars, wolves, hobos, funnel spiders, the works. They started getting bigger and stranger. I only realized later that I didn't run into any other critters for a long time while I was out there. Then the trees started to shift left and right and look all mangled. My first thought was that maybe some natural gases were affecting the trees and driving away the animals. But I am never heard of anything that can morph the trees in that way. Jay was breathing heavily at that point. But then I remembered, I wasn't there to investigate some trees or some spiders. I was investigating disappearances. If there was some kind of gas making people disappear, then I was probably breathing it in. If it was a chemical affecting people, that would explain why they all claimed to see weird creatures. But they wouldn't all hallucinate the same thing, right? That's when I saw something from the corner of my eye. A kitten sticking its head out of a bush. I don't know how it got there, but I couldn't let it stay in the woods alone. I got down nice and slow, not trying to scare it, and used my best calm voice to try to coax it out, but what came out wasn't no ordinary kitten. It had 8 legs. But its legs looked different. Like, they were intended to be bug legs. I swear I can't make this shit up. Jay seemed frustrated now. I wasn't quite sure if I should have found that an odd emotional response to the situation. There was more though. His voice was trembling now. Jay continues, I'm still not sure if what happened next was my imagination or not, but I really hope it is. Jay was now taking many pauses in between words and alternating between speaking fast and speaking slow. A snap of a branch got my attention. In the distance, I saw a deer. It was staring at me with its 8 eyes and not even budging. Then I noticed another one in the distance. It just stood there, staring with its beady little eyes. They were normal, but 7 legs instead of 8. Someone must have shot the thing. I was beginning to back up slowly when I saw something massive. As big as a bear, weaving through the trees way in the distance. I've never felt more fear in my life. I ran the hell out of there as fast as I could, but it was fast. It started catching up. Its 8 or 9, 6 legs gave it more speed than a normal deer, but it still struggled to use them, and that's the only reason why it didn't already catch me. It was stumbling every now and again, but it was catching up nonetheless. I heard the pitter-patter of its hooves gaining closer and closer at an ungodly rate. It sounded like it tripped on something, but I wasn't gonna look back. I only heard that it wasn't as close anymore, but it made up for the distance in no time. It was on my tail again in seconds. I felt its hot breath on my neck and knew it was over for me. But it was gone. It just vanished. The cops said they couldn't find anything though. But one of them pulled me aside and gave me a number. One of your agencies. And here we are now, Jay concluded. I realized I was holding my breath only after he finished reciting what happened. His story was hard to believe, but that's exactly why we were listening. A quick gaze around the table told me that the others shared my suspicion. Well, I regret coming, said Zeke, referring to the terrifying situation we were getting involved in. So the animals took on the genetic traits of spiders? Caitlin asked. Well, yeah, Jay said. A brief silence fell over the room. Adrian didn't say anything. I assumed he wanted his underlings to take the lead here. I, however, still had my role to play. Jay gazed at us with desperation in his eyes. Can you show us on a map where you were when this happened? I asked. I assume you know the woods in and out since you've been here for so long. Of course, he said. He walked over to a nearby room, unlocked the door, and entered. He came out a moment later with a large folded-up map in his hands. He brought it to the table and unfolded it. He then took out a marker and labeled parts of the map. Over here is where the trees started to look weird, and here is where I saw the creatures. I think it was here. Where I was when they disappeared on me, he said. He drew 3 circles on the map in black marker. Adrian sighed. I forgot we're on a mountainside. We'll have to do some hiking, he said. Don't worry, it ain't steep. Remind me what your name was, English boy. It's Adrian, he said, smirking. Adrian Wood. Caitlin rolled her eyes at his obvious attempt to sound like a secret agent from a 90s movie. Oh come on, you kids think everything I do is uncool, give me a break, Adrian responded. They continued to playfully bicker, going completely off topic. Jay seemed to relax. Now I wasn't sure if I should trust y'all with this information at first, but y'all seem comfortable enough with this kind of thing like you see it every day, so I think you're the real deal, Jay said. Jay walked over to the main door of the lodge. Follow me, he said as he flashed a curious look. The hunters raised their guard. Besides Adrian, who had begun typing something on his phone. I made a mental note that Caitlin took pursuit of Jay first. It wasn't exactly a part of my job, not for my current employers, but it's important to understand what would lead someone to do what we do. Might come in handy in the future. For people like me who don't fear the unknown as much as others, it's a bit easier. People like Adrian seek to uncover untold truths and answer humanity's burning questions. I asked Adrian to send me the notes he took on Jay's report. They were sent shortly after our walk behind him. Jay led us to an old dilapidated shed. He took out a stone skeleton key and unlocked the iron chain door. It fell to the ground with a clank. He then walked inside. Caitlin didn't hesitate to enter and Zeke followed behind shortly after. And I thought I was fearless. Even I was hesitant to enter the dark shed behind a stranger. I suppose it was more of a survival instinct though. Jay flicked on a light switch. In the middle of the shed sat a cage with a dusty, ragged cushion that looked like it had been used as a scratching dummy. Atop the cushion sat a kitten. The very kitten Jay had mentioned earlier. This was enough evidence to confirm supernatural activity was taking place. We all stood there in shocked silence watching the 2-headed, 8-legged feline as it sat there watching us with its 8 beady little eyes. It let out a pain-filled meowing sound after having a good look at us. There was no indication that it was desperate to escape, maybe a little tired of being in the cage. Most cats don't like being confined, but for a cat to be confined and surrounded by complete strangers in unknown territory and not show any sign of distress is peculiar. Bloody hell. They really did a number on the poor guy, Adrian said in a pronounced way. All right then, this gives us enough evidence to proceed, I choked out. Now if you'll excuse me, I'm gonna get the hell out of here. Looking at it gives me the creeps, I added. And I'm gonna bleach my eyes, said Zeke. Later we went scouting the site where Jay claimed to see the creatures. Caitlin and I would be in the forest while Adrian and Zeke watched from a monitor. Once we made sure the cameras strapped to our foreheads were sending a live feed to the others, we got ready to go. The fog was incredibly thick. Perfect weather to be snuck up on. Caitlin looked as if she had forgotten where she was. I decided it'd be best to go before my nerves settled in. We walked along the dirt trail under the enormous trees that just seemed to keep growing and growing. Jay had said, once we got far enough they'd really start to block out the sunlight. Whatever sunlight escaped through the clouds and the fog. If not for the circumstances, it would be a very surreal experience. I still enjoyed the nature walk anyhow. I guess I'm just one of the weirdos. I was sure Caitlin had glanced at me a few times, but she played it off well. "Nice morning, huh?" she said, facing me. "Yeah, despite the circumstances, you have to admit it's beautiful out here," I replied. Caitlin laughed. "Despite the circumstances, you don't seem so scared. You used to this kind of thing?" she asked. "I've seen some weird shit. This is super weird, don't get me wrong, but I guess, yeah, I'm used to it. Weird things never really bothered me," I responded. "Weird like this? How'd you get used to all this so quickly? Where I'm from, weird things are a lot more common." "Wait a second. Are you from that monster town?" Ding ding ding. "Yup. Briar, home of the cryptids. I don't know why, but something draws them in waves. It's not so bad though. If you know how things go around there and mind your own business, nothing bad'll happen. We have a saying that goes, if you don't go looking for trouble, you won't find it, or some variation of that. Well, you must have gone looking for trouble if you saw enough to wind up with a job like this," she said with a grin. It was the most I've seen her interested in anything all morning. "Tell you what, I'll tell you my story if you tell me yours," I said, hoping to learn more about her. She fell silent and her expression ceased. "Or, we don't have to," I said awkwardly, trying to salvage the conversation. "Shoo," she said, gesturing towards something in the distance. I looked in the direction she was pointing in anticipation, but I couldn't sense anything. "Adrian, Zeke, are you getting this?" she said. I had almost forgotten they were listening and watching our camera feeds. "No technical difficulties on our end," Adrian responded. The sound of Adrian's voice coming from the earpiece startled me and I stepped back onto a twig, causing it to snap. The sound caused something to stand up and gaze at us from the direction Caitlin had said it was in, a dirty blonde woman. Something was off about her though. We couldn't see her full body, but she stood quite tall at well over 8 feet. Her body seemed almost disproportionate to her height. Her eyes were dead. What was even more apparent were the large, hairy, spider-like pincers on her face. I'd never seen anything like it. They say the worst fear comes from things that appear to be human but aren't quite or not entirely. This was no exception. My heart was pounding and I broke into a cold sweat. A powerful, primal fear made itself known and did not want to be ignored. Then the unexpected happened. Caitlin stepped forward. I snapped my head toward her, shocked at the implication of what she might have been about to do. Before I realized it, I was slowly backing away. I tried my best to creep back to my senses as Caitlin took another step forward, causing the woman or thing to back up. The thing made a bizarre sound I can't really describe well, but it was something like a deep gurgle echoing through a cave. I reached inside my coat pocket and took out 3 large pens. After quickly examining them, I raised the silver pen up to my mouth with my left hand and held 2 identical black pens in my right hand. I took a moment to calm my nerves as I steadied my hand. After taking a deep breath in, I released it and a dart flew out with a very distinct whizzing sound which made Caitlin turn her attention toward me for a second before turning back to the spider. The spider woman didn't have time to react. It hit her right in the vein of her neck. I'm no combatant, but weapons always come in handy. Tranquilizers make it easy to catch a target without having to sweat, and you could always use them in self-defense. Beats dying by a long shot. My other 2 pens are connective knives. The spider woman struggled to let out a cry of agony. She charged forward, revealing massive spider legs over twice the size of her upper body along with the body of a spider. She looked like a cellar spider, otherwise known as the daddy long legs. Her legs seemed to be moving on their own. The spider-like body charged forward, dragging the human upper body with it. From a closer range, I could see that the human part of it had bold hazel-brown eyes. It charged at me, but Caitlin used the opportunity to drive her knife through 2 of its pencil-thin front legs, causing it to fall to the ground. The action was so swift that I didn't even realize the blade went all the way through. She then began to cut off the other 2 legs on the spider's left side. It let out another, more blood-curdling scream as it writhed in anguish. Caitlin looked at the creature with disgust, although I sensed a hint of pity. "The blood smells awful," Caitlin said. "Stay cautious of your surroundings," Adrian said, the earpiece making it sound much louder as I didn't expect it. "Jesus! You almost gave me a heart attack," I exclaimed, peering around to make sure nothing else was around. We were in the clear. All that was left was to figure out what to do with the spider woman. I looked at the poor soul for a bit longer than I should have. "You know, you wear your thoughts on your face," she said as she approached the woman, still gripping her blade. "I can't help it, that's a human being. Or at least used to be one," I said in defense. "Good to know you still consider that a human," she responded. All of a sudden the creature shot up with its remaining 4 legs and, while off balance, cartoonishly bolted away at a speed that shouldn't have been possible given that it was missing half of its limbs that were already extremely thin. And just like that, it was gone. Not a very climactic encounter, but one to be noted. It went further into the forest and we didn't bother chasing after it. "Well, that was unexpected," Caitlin replied. I took a deep breath, not realizing that I had been withholding my breath the whole time. "What was that weapon you used?" asked Adrian. "Yeah, I'm also curious," said Caitlin. "I call them Unity pens. A friend of mine made them. Some are tranquilizers, some are knives, but if anyone checks inside my satchel they'll only see ordinary pens." "That's pretty neat. Think you could get me one that shoots fireworks?" Zeke asked. "I could try," I responded. I had some time to gather my thoughts as we walked. I kept thinking about Jay's story. For starters, why did he take the kitten? He claimed he wanted proof, which I suppose makes sense, but to even consider touching such a freakish thing is odd. And why did the cage look old and used? It reeked of a horrible smell, like it had been previously used, that the cat didn't seem to be bothered by. I'm no animal expert, but if you put an animal in an enclosed area that smells of another creature, it shouldn't be so relaxed. Perhaps the kitten had time to accept the situation. Everything about this situation that normally wouldn't make sense just seemed to fit perfectly together. It was as if the cat had always been there. That would explain a few things. Then there was Caitlin. Her lackadaisical behavior toward everything made her a spectacle. She didn't seem to think her life was on the line here. Though, judging by how she handled her dagger, I'd concur. Or perhaps she really didn't have a care in the world. There are many reasons one would choose to become a cryptid hunter, and one of them is the most horrifying way to throw your life away. After all, this isn't exactly the kind of job someone with everything to lose would take. I had no idea what she'd been through. However, I couldn't help but want to rule out that possibility. "Read. Nothing about her demeanor, Reed. Seemed to indicate that anything was, read, Caitlin said, snapping me out of my thoughts. Huh? Oh sorry, I have a bad habit of getting lost in my thoughts. She looked curious but satisfied with my answer. We were still walking, the fog just as thick as when I arrived. Caitlin cleared her throat. I think we're at the place Jay marked on his map. I can tell that there are more monsters nearby. But I don't see the trees he mentioned, said Caitlin. It sounded like Caitlin was going to say something else but caught herself. I made a quick mental note of it, wondering if she could have possibly been hiding something important. Though, there was a good chance it was nothing and I was just overthinking. We were at our destination. I looked around and saw that the trees were nothing like Jay had described. They were giant but ordinary trees. I put aside my doubts and opted to trust my new colleague. You're right. Maybe we're at the wrong place or, my theory was correct, I said. What's your theory? Caitlin asked. I looked to Caitlin, her eyes filled with intrigue. There's a magic veil here, which Jay manages to slip through. Her intrigued expression ceased and was replaced by surprise. She stood still for a moment before addressing her team, Adrian, Zeke, we're on our way. She began walking at a fast pace toward the direction we came from. I followed behind her. If he lied it could be because either he created these monsters or he's working with whoever did, I choked out. That would mean he lured us out here to ambush us. So why hasn't he? Caitlin said. I don't know but be on your guard, I said. We're being watched, said Caitlin unexpectedly. I shuddered at the thought of being confronted by another one of these bizarre entities. Caitlin was as stoic as usual, of course. She radiated an energy that said she wasn't to be trifled with. I felt safer around her. Adrian and Zeke greeted us at the lodge. Now we had a few words for Jay, thankfully we had his cell number. Jay had provided us with a private lodge. It had a cafeteria, lounge, staff room and 10 guest rooms. Quite a big place for only the 4 of us. We heard a few knocks on the main entrance door every so often and had to pretend the place was empty. We all gathered in the lounge and called Jay. The red wool lounge chairs looked a little too fancy to be in a place like this. Adrian took out his cell phone and dialed Jay's number. Jay picked up. Hey. Adrian, was it? How's the job going? Jay said. Things didn't go according to plan. We arrived at the location you marked on your map, but we couldn't find the warped trees. We're heading back out in a bit, but we just wanted to be sure you sent us to the right place, Adrian said. Oh, I'm pretty sure. When you get to them tall-ass Douglas trees it should be along the path. I know I didn't make no mistake. Might have been gases after all, messing with my mind. But I swear it was right along the path. You can't miss me, said Jay, apologetically. Well, we did happen to find several monsters in the area, so we must have been going the right way. Perhaps some other forces are at play here. We'll get to the core of this. But first, is there anything you're not telling us? Adrian said. Jay didn't respond. Caitlin piped up, this only works if we can trust each other. Jay now responded, then let me ask y'all something. How did y'all get in this business anyway? Monster hunting. There was a brief silence as we exchanged looks. We all instinctively looked to Adrian, our senior, for how to proceed. He gave a sort of daring look, as if to say be careful how you proceed, sticking to his decision to let the juniors take the lead. Though I figured my next action would work out for all of us. I guess you can call it chance. I was just at the right place at the right time. I was at a low point in my life and someone came along to pull me from my despair and put me on the right path. She gave me a chance to make a living by helping people in ways others can't. And if you don't mind being traumatized, the benefits are amazing. I said. The others looked at me with a mix of emotions, most notably surprise. Another silence fell over us, only to be broken by some background noise on Jay's end of the call. Some people just look really hard until they find something that wants to tear their head off, said Zeke. My confusion was short-lived as Adrian bellowed a mighty laugh. He was soon joined by Jay and then Caitlin. I'll be back tonight at 7. We can talk then. Just keep doing what you're doing. I gotta run, said Jay. And with that he hung up. Adrian sighed. Well, he's an awfully dodgy character, isn't he? He said rhetorically. For sure, chimed Zeke. Got any ideas, Mr. Detective? Zeke asked. If he was able to pass through a veil, we just need to get in the same way he did. That or we find another way in which will be difficult unless one of you happens to be some kind of mage, I said. So what do we do? Zeke asked. I thought for a moment. Let's just kill all the bastards on the outside, Caitlin pitched in. My eyes lit up. Adrian smirked, revealing that he had the same revelation I had. We can enter the same way they do, I exclaimed. Of course. Why didn't I think of that earlier, said Zeke. Right then. If an accursed is behind this we'll need to be more prepared. And if there's a veil it means our witch is an actual witch, stated Adrian. Is that possible? Caitlin asked what was on my mind. It's happened before, answered Zeke. Can any cryptid become a Forsaken? She asked eagerly. I'd guess every single one that isn't some void voodoo thingy could probably become one, Zeke said. Well, this actually works out for us. We can actually get information out of them, I said. Push, it works out for you because you're not the one whose life is on the line, she said jokingly. She was right. I didn't intend to fight, although I didn't intend to watch from the sidelines either. I have a mission to see the end of the Forsaken era and I'll be damned if I don't see this all the way through. But deep down I knew I could do more. Hey, we all have our roles, Zeke said, coming to my defense. Sure, he doesn't have a godlike physique me dash, he continued before Caitlin interrupted. I'm kidding Zeke, she said defensively. Adrian checked his watch and proclaimed, it's 1 p.m. now. We'll be out again in 4 hours just to scout. In the meantime get some food and have some fun, yeah. I've got some calls to make, Adrian said, and he went to the single room on the first floor he designated as his staying area. I'll be in my room. Just call if you need me, said Caitlin. Want me to get you something to eat? Zeke asked. A drink would be nice, but take your time, she responded. I'll get you something anyway, I know you'll just end up eating all my snacks, Zeke said. She was about to protest before showing a face of defeat and acceptance. That's fair, she said. Yo Reed. I'm gonna take a look around the place and hit up the plaza. You wanna come? Zeke said invitingly. Yeah, sure. I was about to do the same thing, I laughed. We stepped out into the coat of fog. The sky was still gray but the fog was starting to disperse. The cool breeze brought with it the smell of maple and pine. We took a tour around the retreat. Aside from the nearby shopping district, there wasn't much to see other than plants and insects. After looking around and only finding an alarming number of spiders to hold our fascination, we decided to head to the shopping district. Zeke and I debated whether we could call it a plaza or not, which he suggested it was. It was a community of small shops scattered around a wide area beside a main road. We browsed a few trinket shops before heading to the diner. The diner was a fair size. I swung the door open and a bell sounded above it, the kind that alerts employees and store owners when someone enters the facility. The pleasant aroma of coffee and tea wafted from behind the counter. Mellow jazz quietly emanated from several radios stationed overhead. There was a certain air to the place that just immediately puts you at ease. I could feel the stresses of the day beginning to melt away as we entered the diner. The fog persisted through the evening. "Good afternoon," said the person behind the counter, a chubby, young woman with long, black tied-back hair sporting an orange apron with the name of the diner emboldened on it in black. "Table fare too?" she asked. "Yes please," replied Zeke. "Would you like a booth seat?" she asked. "That would be splendid," he replied matter-of-factly with a smirk strewn across his face and nudged me with an elbow. "Detectives need their privacy," he remarked, only loud enough for me to hear. "I'm not a detective," I said. "Follow me," she said, grabbing a couple of menus. She brought us to a table at the side of the store near the corner and beside a window with the blinds down. As we were about to take a seat, I noticed something that made all the stresses of the day start to creep back into me and my heart sank in my chest. Sitting at the booth. In the corner right next to ours was a young woman with dirty blonde hair and hazel brown eyes. Second story. This story was shared by u/Reflexy0n. We found a dead Wendigo on my grandpa's property. For those involved in dealing with cryptids, if any of you are reading this, why do you do it? Other than the money, of course, I feel a lot of you do it for the rush. The adrenaline. But where's the line drawn? Where does exhilaration evolve into panic? Don't get me wrong, a little risk-taking is food for the soul, but so many factors can go wrong in any situation. In particular, what do you do when you find the corpse of a cryptid you were hunting, eviscerated and dismembered? When the abrupt realization hits you that there's a bigger fish? My grandpa wasn't quite on the level of monster hunting, but boy was he a crazy motherfucker. Once, he hunted a grizzly using nothing but a crossbow, wet mud and leaves, and his wit. He's had its head mounted above his forest house fireplace ever since. I can't say how far back his love for the wilderness is rooted, but I know he grew tired of the city long before retiring from his job as a metropolitan engineer. Since then, he's lived out in an old house, in the northwestern reaches of the Olympic National Forest, about 40 miles from the park itself, Washington State. I can only imagine how lonely it must have been, living out there by himself, but he never seemed any the worse for it. In recent years, I've come to be good friends with a guy I met in college, Martin. I could see the same fire in his eyes as my grandpa's when it came to the outdoors, always pestering me to come with on camping trips, going fishing, hunting, you name it. It was a no-brainer bringing him along for a visit to my grandpa's. Honestly, I feared they might get along too well, and Martin would never return with me. In the end, it didn't matter, because both of us have been ingrained with a morbid aversion to the woods since that day. Martin was particularly eager this time, practically vibrating in the passenger of my Jeep. Last trip, Grandpa promised he'd show him the ropes of skinning in pelts. Martin often went on about how he'd feel sitting affront a roaring fireplace with a great deerskin rug laid out beneath it. My motivation was simply to check up on my grandpa. He hadn't been responding to my attempts at contacting him for the past week, so naturally I was a bit worried. We ran into a problem early, driving up the long dirt road to my grandpa's. Rounding a corner, I slammed on the brakes, seeing a slew of fallen trees lying across the road. Damn! What happened here? Martin exclaimed. There haven't been any storms recently, right? I sat with my hands 10 and 2 on the steering wheel, lost for words. No, it's been pretty clear weather round these parts since March. Weird. Shutting the engine off, I hopped out of the Jeep. The only sounds were the leaves, flittering in the mid-spring breeze. Nature's white noise. We were a little over 2 miles away from the house, an easily walkable distance. Grandpa had enough equipment that we didn't need to bring much of our own, so our bags were light. I had my phone, a flashlight, water, spare clothes, and my utility watch strapped around my wrist. My plan was to get up to Grandpa's, and come back down in his truck to chop up the fallen logs with a chainsaw. We thought it would be more fun to go through the woods alongside the track. A long dirt road means only boredom, after all. We scrambled down the left side slope and began our trek, keeping an eye on the road to follow its route. Only a few minutes later, the smell hit us. Putrid carrion. It was nothing unexpected. Animals in the forest die all the time. Even so, that hardwired part of my brain was repulsed at the smell. Shit, something's festering out here, I said. Can't imagine how it'd smell in summer. Martin let out a small retch, but agreed. The stench only grew stronger as we went on. It was at its peak when I almost tripped over a sharp object on the ground. I thought it to be a cluster of branches at first, but the notion quickly dissolved upon seeing their pale, ceramic reflections. A decapitated stag's head lay right in front of us. It was wrong, though. The teeth were too long, and the bone of its face was exposed. Even with the odor, I could tell it was fresh from the viscous black blood that seeped from its neck and mouth. Martin spoke up. God damn, that's freaky. You think a bear did this? I mean, there's only black bears here, right? I doubt they could pull off something like this. A cougar, maybe. I don't know. Never seen one straight up decapitate a stag like this, though. My eyes were drawn to a trail of blood, forming a jagged streak ahead of us on the ground. My gaze followed it, until it terminated at the stag's grisly mess of a body. Well, it looked quadrupedal from a distance, but as we moved closer, I found myself sorely incorrect. The body was that of a monster. Large in stature, but bony and gaunt. Long, razor-sharp claws lying splayed across the ground like kitchen knives. And all covered in patches of dark wizened fur. Is it bad? Martin called out, approaching from behind me to get a look. When he saw it, he went still and quiet, as had I. There was no statement that could do the sight justice. I'd heard the old tales of the horrors lurking deep inside the forests, but never experienced them face to face. It was still, laying dead as the fallen leaves beneath it. It looked crushed and broken, littered with what seemed to be wide and deep puncture wounds. Martin managed to speak up. Is that? But before he could say any more, a sudden snap broke the tension. The snap of a twig, no, a branch. My spine shot straight upright. Against my better judgment, I found my head gradually swiveling in the direction the noise had come from. When I caught a vast, hulking shape in my peripheral, I whipped around to face whatever was there. I saw something, just for a moment. Enormous, long limbs draped in shaggy hair, the color of pine bark. But as quickly as I turned, the image vanished. Rising dread threatened to pry my lips apart in a scream. I looked far and wide, but nothing was there. Kel, what is it? Wait, the cougar isn't still here, is it?" Martin whispered. "No, it's nothing. Let's keep going, we can talk about this later with my grandpa." But the cat could still be loitering about somewhere. "It's best we don't stay in the same place for too long." Before departing, I snapped a few pictures of the mangled corpse on my phone, zooming in on the head without backtracking to get a better angle. Something told me that turning back, however briefly, would be a terrible mistake. We went on with urgent pace, pretending to ignore the heavy movements between the trees nearby. Large animals will inevitably give away their movements, but they snap twigs, not entire branches. Even so, the movements sounded anything but clumsy. No, they sounded calculated, those of a stalking predator. As hard as I tried to filter them out, I caught myself glancing to the sides and behind very often. I don't know whether I was hoping to see something, or nothing. Still, the woods around us were empty, other than ourselves. "Hey, Kel, if there's a mountain lion around here, we should go up onto the road for a bit. It'll be easier to bolt if we need to." I agreed, and we veered off to the right, climbing up the roadside slope. Deep down I knew that whatever was out there, it wasn't a big cat. We only told ourselves that, skirting the subject of monsters now made very real to us. The forest fell silent as we walked along the road. That was far from being comforting, though. If the woods are quiet, predators are about. It's a well-known idea in the community of wilderness enthusiasts. What did ease my mind to a degree was the sight of a herd of deer standing in the track. They cocked their heads to look at us, but didn't seem all too disturbed by our presence. At the same time, a feeling of being exposed, vulnerable, grew as a hard lump in my gut. They started to move on as we got closer, wandering off the road and into the woods. One of the deer stayed in place. It wasn't frozen, no, but constricted. It twitched and whimpered as it started to rise off of the ground, as if weightless. It happened so quickly. Its screams were cut off as its limbs were snapped and crushed, and deep wounds erupted over its body. And then, like it had been there the whole time, it stood. It was a nightmare. Huge, unimaginably so, rivaling two elephants stacked up. It was hunched over, resting on impossibly long and thick forelimbs ending in spindly, sloth-like claws. Its body was long too, ending in a pair of shorter legs, knees inverted with feet supported by spur-like appendages. The lolling head that sat atop an arched neck looked like some bizarre cross between a horse and a crocodile. Hollow pits in place of eyes, the torn skin around its mouth revealing horribly uneven and misshapen teeth that jutted out at irregular angles. The fading sunlight glinted off of the long gashes covering its sides and head. The dead creature from earlier had definitely put up a fight. But it could never have been enough. As we stood, stunned, it reciprocated our stare, the only real movements being the sets of rib-like appendages undulating on its underside, rendering the deer into a torn sack of flesh and bone fragments. The poor animal seemed to wither before our eyes as the sharp ribs forced deeper into its body, like a juice box having the last drops sucked out of it. In that moment, we were part of the herd. Paralyzed. Some had already run off, but others were as statues in the presence of this beast. Another smell hit us then, different from the stench of decay like earlier, but equally as sickening. Like moist earth, sulfur, methane, and dead fish. Its source was clear as wisps of gas from the beast's mouth became thick, billowing fumes, rising into the evening sky. The tension was broken with the deer's mutilated husk thudding to the ground. The remaining deer took flight, scampering off into the trees, and in response the beast snapped its head in their direction. Something was wrong with its head, flopping around clumsily as it turned. I took a step back as it let out a deep, guttural rattle, before bounding off after the herd, its matted hair swinging violently. It splintered a tree as it went, but was totally unfazed by the impact. We waited until its thundering gallops faded into the quickly darkening night before saying anything. What the fuck, what the fuck? What was that thing? Martin sputtered, tears welling up in his eyes. I don't know, man, but we have to get to the house before sundown. I have a feeling our chances at escaping it are little to none in the dark. Are you crazy? We have to go back. I want to get as far from this place as Padash. What about my grandpa? We can't just leave him here with that thing. Martin didn't look over to me, but wasted no time disagreeing, starting his jog up the road. We were already over halfway to my grandpa's house, and even if we wanted to escape, it would be a menial task for the creature to smash the Jeep off-road. The solitary light in the distance looked like the gates of heaven. It radiated safety. But I knew we couldn't continue out in the open, completely exposed. I looked down to my utility watch, making a mental note of the direction of the house, north-northeast, before grabbing Martin by the arm and leading him off the left side of the road. Nature's cruel irony manifested in the steepening terrain and the thickening brush. The house's light quickly faded, leaving us with only our bearings to navigate. I thought we might have gone off track for a terrifying moment, but I saw the column of smoke above the distant tree canopy that could only be from my grandpa's chimney. Come on, this way. As we neared, no light became apparent. Maybe he'd already gone to bed. I could only guess with his lack of communication. We came up onto the lip of a hill, sloping down towards a flat clearing. But there was no house. There, the pillar of smoke, but there was no source. It began in mid-air from nothing. As we stopped to look, the point where the smoke came from jerked around in the air. When I picked up on the organic stench, it clicked in my mind. Just like before, there it was, looking directly at us, the thick fumes spewing from its mouth. But I noticed something else this time. Now that the moon hung in the sky, its light glinted off of something beneath the creature's head. 6 black orbs, shiny like obsidian, 3 on either side of its neck. They darted about, independent of each other, and I knew immediately what they were. Eyes. What kind of abomination was this? If those were its eyes, and it ate the deer with that structure resembling a ribcage, then that must mean it had a false head. A distraction, defense mechanism maybe. It made sense how this head flopped around limply with the beast's unnatural movements. I blinked in quick succession, and looked down to my watch. Due east. We had been misled. It had circled around us to lie in wait. In one motion, I gripped onto Martin's shoulder and pulled him in the direction we were meant to be heading in a wild sprint for survival. The beast erupted into movement, ribs rippling as it let out another rumbling trill. Martin looked over to me, confused. Hey, dude, what are you doing? There's nothing to dash. Shut up. Just run as fast as fucking possible, now, don't stop for anything. Our pounding feet were matched by heavy thumps and loud cracks of trees being smashed. I dared not steal a glance behind, fearing that even the slightest break in pace would mean death. There. I struggled to see what Martin was talking about, until the yellow light became visible between the tree trunks. We were only a few hundred yards away, but I was surprised the creature hadn't already caught up to us. Even the trees in its way stood no chance at impeding it. It had, almost, caught up. I could feel the air pressure from its massive body, charging through the trees behind. Close enough that, at any moment, I might feel its claws cleave my body into pieces. A saving grace. Coming up on our left was a dense patch of old oak trees. I swerved towards them, leaping through the spaces between trunks, just large enough for us to get through. I hit the ground, rolling sideways. There wasn't even time to be dazed as an immense slam sounded from where we'd just been. I scrambled backwards, looking to see a great arm slinking through the gap. It was thick, but not as thick as the oak's. The claws tapped about, searching blindly for our frail bodies. "Go!" I shouted, and the both of us shot to our feet and bolted towards the light. As we ran, the sounds grew distant. Was it stunned, or did it still think we were behind those trees? I didn't care. All that mattered was being inside and not out. Gravel clattered against the front of the house as we skidded to a stop. I rapped on the door, devolving into pounding when they went unheard. On what was probably the 20th knock, my fist met only air, and I stumbled in through the now open doorway. I looked up to meet my grandpa's gaze. His eyes were wild. He didn't look like himself. He glanced behind me at Martin, then behind him. Whatever he saw out there, his pupils contracted in response. "Hurry, boys, get inside," he whisper-shouted. We filed in, and he went to bolt the door, but hesitated. His hand fell limply. No use. He was right, if the beast wanted to pay a visit, it would do so regardless of our home security. We followed him quietly to an uncovered floor hatch. "What's this, Mr. Barnett?" Martin asked, regarding the hatch. "Huh? Oh, this here's my old wine cellar." Martin went to ask further before being interrupted. Get down the ladder first, son. You can shoot your questions once we're safe." He pulled on a handle, opening the hatch to reveal a sturdy wooden ladder that led into a dim space beneath. One by one, we clambered down its dusty rungs, meeting the cold concrete floor at the bottom. Grandpa was last, tugging a heavy rug over the open hatch, before closing and securing it. "I take it you've seen the thing, right?" "Jesus, Granddad, we barely got away," I gasped, still out of breath from our escape. "Unscathed?" "Yeah, mostly, other than some scratches." "Good." He walked over to an upturned crate and plopped down onto it. Martin and I looked between each other, then back at him. Well. Martin said, "You seem to know what we were dealing with, so what the hell is it?" Grandpa gave Martin a scowl of disapproval, quickly relenting into understanding. "I'd scrutinize you on your manners, boy, but now ain't the time." He released a tired gasp, letting his head drop down, before inhaling sharply and looking back up at us. "I seen it only once before, in my varsity years. Had some Danish friends on my course who said I should come visit them over there, go and do some backpacking in their home country. Beautiful landscapes over in Denmark, really. Peaks rising out of the trees, you know." Before he could lose himself in a daydream, I cleared my throat to bring him back to reality. "Oh, right. So, we were pretty deep in the woods when it happened. We'd all gotten paranoid, 'cause we thought something was following us. Something big, elk maybe. But we never saw nothing, only heard it. And then, God, one of the girls in front of me started to, levitate. I dunno, she was just rising up off the ground, gripped by something. Whatever it was made a mess from her. Crunched her up like a meatball being squeezed. I saw it then. Curved bones wrapped around her, stabbed in deep. Ain't never gonna forget the sight of it, it's like a stain on my mind. We saw the same thing, Martin piped up, only it was a deer. Looked like it sucked everything out of it when it was done. Yeah, I can't say I know how it works. You can only see it if you know something's there. If it's there. Anyway, we ran as fast as we could back down the trail, and we seemed to lose it. The whole time there was this rancid stink though, eggy and earthy. Ugh. We wound up back in the town we'd started from, went straight to the police station and reported it. Apparently all they found was a little chunk of meat, piece of thigh or something like that. One of the other guys told me about the tale later on. He brought up the smoke we saw rising out of the forest, when we were back in the town. An old Danish legend went that people through history seen smoke columns in the woods, and most who went to check it out never returned. They said it would move around, not like how a fire would spread, but like it was wandering to and fro. Damn, that's a horrible story, Grandpa, I said. It doesn't help us figure out what it is though. We already know the stuff you've just told us. Well, he replied, I'm sure it's got many names, seeing how it can just pop up where it likes. But I only heard it called the skorstender. Means chimney beast, if I'm remembering right. That makes sense. We thought we were seeing the smoke from your chimney, but it led us right to it. Kel, Grandpa sighed, this house ain't even got a chimney. Martin looked over to me, scoffing, then back over to Grandpa. So it lures people in like that? Sure, but I don't think it means to. I'ma take a gander and say it started up with the fumes after it ate that deer. Yeah, I replied. Whatever that thing is, it ain't from here. It ain't from anywhere on the planet, I think. It eats something, then starts giving off smoke. Waste product from digesting, I'd guess. So, shit gas. Martin chuckled. He always was able to find a way to lighten the mood in dire situations, even if just a little. I looked up at the monochrome ceiling above us, mulling over what Grandpa had said. I remembered how this whole thing had started, and pulled out my phone to bring up my photos. We found this after starting our way up to yours on foot. I have an inkling, but do you know what it is? Grandpa squinted at the screen, then took it from my hand. Scroll to the right, that's only the head, I said. His silent focus was only punctured by the dull taps of his finger on the screen. Recognition lit up in his eyes, his head bobbing up and down. Well, I'll be damned. Wendigo, right? I asked. I gotta say, never seen one around these parts before, but then again I was never looking for one. I doubt you need it, but keep that as a reminder for what this beast is capable of. I put my phone back in my pocket, sighing and letting my chin drop into my hands. In any other situation I'd be shocked to find out such a creature was real, but not now. This is all great, Mr. Barnett, Martin said with quivering uncertainty, but it doesn't help us. What are we gonna do? What can we do? I don't know. Well, I have a stupid idea, but it's just grappin' at straws. Anything over sitting here and waiting to die, Martin breathed, staring off into space, anything. Grandpa looked up toward the basement window, the only source of natural light in the room, what little of it remained. Well, I was checking my traps out east from here, about 700 yards into the woods. Only, when I got there, there was this smudge. I don't know what to call it, but that's the best I can describe what it looked like. It was like, looking into it, I couldn't register what I was looking at. Hurt my eyes after a while. Never seen nothing like it. Was after that I started seeing the skorstender, so. He trailed off, like he was struggling to find the words to say. So, what? I pressed, leaning forward in anticipation. Again, this is guesswork, but I think that's where it came out from. I threw a rock into it when I was there, but ain't hear it hit the ground. Like it went someplace else. If we can just lead it back there, just get it to go back in dash. Wait, hold on, I interrupted, shouldn't we call someone? Police? The damn army? What you think'll happen to the cops when they come out here, huh? What's a chief and a rookie in one police car gonna be able to put up against it? And good luck convincing US military to send out Marines. You'd be lucky if they thought it was a joke. I shut my mouth, swallowing my next words, allowing Grandpa to continue with his proposition. Either the beast leaves, or we die. I'm not even gonna talk about trying to drive away, you seen what it does to the trees. Stealth might work, but it's better at that than we are, big as it is, and I don't want to risk either of yous losing your lives. His last remark sent a chill down my spine. He'd said nothing explicitly, but I already began to understand what he meant. Granddad, you. Don't worry about me, champ. I got something, but you gotta listen closely. Both of you. Martin and I set our full attention on him. I wanted to hear his plan, but I really hoped it was going to go a different way from what I was thinking. Now, I want to make this clear before anything else. I'm going alone, and you boys need to sit tight and do as I say. My heart dropped, plunging into the stone-cold sea of despair. Are you crazy? No, I have to go with you, I dash. Grandpa cut me off, shushing me. As I say, he commanded. I knew he was right, but in the face of loss my thoughts wrestled against the idea. Okay. Now I'm gonna call you when I'm a ways off, alright? You have to pick up, and stay on the call with me. It's vital you keep your attention on my voice. I need both of you to be brave for the next part. I need you to make as much noise as you can. Martin's eyes bulged in fear. Won't that just get us killed? I haven't finished. That's only up until I call you. When I do, you shut up, and you hide in the darkest corner of this cellar, okay? I was heaving for breath now, cold beads of sweat budding on my forehead, but I closed my eyes and stilled myself. Why yeah, okay. Good. Once we're connected, I'll start dash. We were silenced by a single muffled thump from overhead, so forceful that the ceiling spewed cement dust down on us. Then another thump. And another. And another. I fell off my perch in shock when a booming crash sounded from above, chased by the clattering of rubble. The steady thuds drew nearer, louder, until the only sound was that of the floorboards, groaning under immense weight. I looked over to Grandpa, who looked over to me and whipped a finger to his lips. I nodded, then slowly turned toward the basement hatch. The beast was trying its best to move silently. A stifled whimper escaped my lungs as I saw the hatch buckle. A loud bang shook the house's foundations, then nothing. In the silence, I could make out the beast's ticking growl. It was toying with us. Trying to catch us out, make us think we'd been foiled so we'd burst out in a panic and try to flee. Its intelligence terrified me so much more than its grotesque appearance. It tried this bait a few more times, before huffing angrily. The heavy creaks grew distant until we could no longer hear it, aside from the single crash of a fallen tree somewhere outside. I stood up, eager to set this plan into motion, only to be dragged back down by a firm grip on my arms. My eyes fell to meet my grandpa's, looking at me with a wide-eyed scowl. "Sit down," he hissed, not yet. Bastard's clever. It's probably waiting at the tree lean, watching for us to come out. The three of us sat in silence, ears attuned for even the slightest noise to indicate its presence. After an excruciating wait, Grandpa rose to his feet and crept over to the ladder. He scaled it, wincing at the creak of a rung, then pushed open the hatch ever so slowly. The rug that had been above was tattered, torn fragments slipping down into the now open space. He peeked out from side to side, checking rigorously that we were safe. As he pressed his hand upward, what sounded like a broken tile was disturbed, clattering to the floor above us. Grandpa froze in place, visibly tensing. Kriawak. The heavy step, followed by the guttural rattle. I prayed to God I wouldn't hear, forced Grandpa into action. He pushed himself off of the ladder, tucking and rolling to the floor, right before the hatch was slammed by immense force, cracking it and warping the hinges. Grandpa shot to his feet, adrenaline far outpacing his old age. He glanced around wildly at the floor, before looking up at us with newfound determination. Ah, shit, damn it. Change of plans. Martin, distracted. Make some noise. Kel, give me a leg up to the window. Martin's jaw fell open, and his breathing quickened. Fuck, he yelped, pressing fingers into his temples, but to his credit he turned toward the hatch and started up a racket straight after. Come get it, you fucker. You ugly sack of shit. While Martin was busy cussing out the chimney beast, Grandpa and I hurried over to the window and braced myself in a kneel, fingers locked together forming a foothold, where he planted a foot. 1, 2, 3 dash. I heaved him up, holding my posture while he unlatched and swung the window open. My body was already tired from running away, and Grandpa was heavier than he looked. Still, I hauled him up further until he was out past the waist, and he pulled himself out into the hazy night. I kept my focus on him as he turned around, refusing the urge to look as I heard claws cleaving away ravenously. All right, I'll be calling in a minute, he panted. When I do, tell Martin to zip. I love you, bud. You too, Granddad. My words latched onto him, fueling a forgotten instinct that slammed his heels into the forest floor and sent him sprinting into the trees, fading until he was merged with the dark itself. I was grounded again when Martin let out a shriek, and I turned to see him backpedaling from those spindly claws extending through the jagged hole that once was the hatch. A thick trail of blood smeared from him as he shuffled back, the same crimson that slicked one of the titanic claws. It got me, ah, God it hurts, he cried, flipping over and resorting to a belly crawl towards me. I rushed over and dragged him as far away as I could, but he flopped to the floor in shock when I released my grip. His calf was a mess of exposed, glistening flesh and bone, sliced through like warm butter. His mouth hung half open, but without a sound, so I rushed to build a cacophony in his place. As booming as I tried to make myself sound, I devolved into whimpering shouts. The beast's arm had reached almost halfway across the room, yet still it slithered further and further through the broken hatch, claws tick-tick-ticking around in search of our flesh. Backed up into the furthest corner alongside Martin, the monstrous hand grew closer. Slowly, agonizingly so. I only became aware of the incoming call from the vibration in my jacket pocket. It felt as if, somehow, safety lay in the act of answering my grandpa's call. My hand shot into my pocket and yanked the phone out, fumbling with the touchscreen and picking up. Granddad? It's so close, it's about to get us, do something, please, I wailed into my phone. Instead of a reply, a loud crack rang through the night, and then the phone. The beast's arm lurched backwards, freezing for a moment, before it tore out from the basement, peppering the floor with wood fragments. As simple a sound it was, I recognized it. His Black Hawk. He'd taken it with him. I don't know when he picked it up, he may have had it on him the entire time. Out the window, I saw the hulking silhouette barrel into the trees at speeds rivaling my Jeep in fifth. I jumped when I heard Grandpa abruptly begin shouting over the call. The words were indiscernible, blending in with the scuffled sounds of movement. I took the moment to take off my jacket, then my t-shirt, which I pulled tightly around Martin's upper calf as a tourniquet. "Hey, Kel," Grandpa said over the phone, sounding hollow and tinny, "make sure you keep up your aerobics. Gah, it sure as shit don't get easier with the years." I let out a half-hearted chuckle. "I will. I want to go hiking through these woods with you, camping, surviving off of the hunt." "I know you do." God, I do too," he said, stifling a sob. "You're gonna have to stay strong for your ma, okay? There ain't no chance I'm getting out this time. But you two are." I broke down then, thick watery streams lining my cheeks. "I'm going to miss you. So much, Granddad." But we had some good times." "Amazin' times, no. I sure as hell did. And, well, this is a pretty badass way to go out, right?" An unfamiliar comfort swelled up inside me, almost breaking through the tears. "Yeah. Alright, I'm here. The smudge. No idea what I'll find through there." I could hear the thundering beast across the call as it gained on him, its clicks and rattles too. "I'm going in. Promise me one thing, though." "Anything, Granddad." "Heh. You be good, kid, and make my daughter proud. That's all." A bizarre noise came from the phone speaker, something akin to the sound of a stone sliding across a frozen lake, followed by a splash that seemed to kill all noise. That dead silence was broken when a shuddering voice spoke again through the phone. "What the? Where are you?" I yelled, pleading for any small morsel of information he could provide. "I don't know, I'm in a pipe, I think. Some kinda glass tube. I can see everything outside. It's all there, all at once, there's more of these tubes, so many more, they're branching and splitting but." The connection got progressively weaker as he talked, jittering and buzzing in my ears. "I'm heading down this tube now, and there, central one, but it's huge. Enormous, holy shit. No, I don't think it's the central, in the distance, so many, the hell is this place?" My exhausted brain couldn't fathom a single thing to say. I just listened, almost as confused as he was. Streams of, through some of, and the dash. He was cut off by a tremendous splash, but the sound quality at this point made it sound more like a roar. I could only hear his whimpers, until that hissing trill crawled its way under my skin once more. It melded with the audio glitches. But then, I heard something I never could have expected, even after seeing what I'd seen. CKCKCKKRRR. SSSSS. CKCK. It sounded as if the creature was stuttering, clearing its throat, before. Xxalti BRRR. Ariadith. It TTS flow shows us, CKCKCK, the path. It spoke. The unearthly, nightmare beast had spoken. Its words were jarring, like it was repeating after someone teaching it how to talk, broken by animalistic clicks and hisses. Grandpa screamed, but the call lost connection completely and drew it out as a high, sine wave tone. My hand acted off its own accord and loosened its grip, sending the phone clattering to the floor. By the time I had crouched down to grab it, only my home screen greeted me as I pressed the home button. Call failed. I looked down to Martin. He was out cold, but breathing. The bleeding had died down, but he needed urgent treatment. Even so, I fell to the floor, back slouched up against the cold concrete wall, and decided to wait it out until sunrise. I was certain Grandpa's plan worked, but just the slightest uncertainty held me in place. The adrenaline was beginning to wear off. My limbs ached, head thumping. I fought against my eyelids, but they felt as if dragged down by anchors. All light vanished, and I faded into sleep. I woke to heat on my face, and a red-orange blur. I opened my eyes, grimacing at the rays of sunlight that poured through the destroyed basement hatched directly onto my face. Any notions of a simple nightmare were shattered. Martin. I rolled over on my side, seeing him laying a few feet away. Thank God, he was still breathing. The blood coating the skin of his left leg was dry and crusted, but a small amount of it still seeped from his mangled limb. I chose to let him rest while I turned to the broken ladder, hauling myself up what remained of its rungs, and out into the house, what remained of it, at least. Utter devastation. I do not exaggerate when I say almost the entire front portion of the house was gone. Wooden beams jutted out from piles of rubble and dust, but all was still. Unlike the day prior, birdsong weaved throughout the woods and into the ruins. I recall learning about how forest animals would go quiet when a predator is nearby, but I'd been too on edge to notice until their sounds had returned. Still, subtle chills wormed their way up my spine. I felt safe, but I'd also felt safe with Grandpa in the basement, until the attack. No smoke plumed from anywhere across the tree-line, and no stench defiled my nose, but I couldn't shake it. I spent some time scrabbling around in the back half of the house that still stood. Quicker than expected, I found the keys to Grandpa's truck, in the corner of the kitchen counter. I practically leaped down into the old wine cellar, then slowed my pace, gently shaking Martin, until he stirred. He was groggy and confused. "Don't worry, man. I'm gonna get you home." I wrapped his left arm over my shoulder, supporting him to the ladder. It was tough getting him out, but I did, and we hobbled through the ruins to the truck. Driving faster than truly necessary, I swerved, slamming on the brakes when the fallen tree trunks came into view almost out of nowhere. The jolt shook Martin, and he came to attention from the pain in his leg. I apologized for it, but wasted no more time in getting out and helping Martin down from his seat. The stench of death was stronger in the air, the Wendigo corpse festering nearby. It brought me back to the night before, the raw terror, spawning paranoia within me that grew intense over the short walk between the truck and my Jeep. I felt exposed, naked. We made it across the trees and into my Jeep quickly, even with Martin's injury. Still, without any warning signs of the beast, my heart was drumming so hard I could see my chest pulse. After a messy three-point turn, the wheels slipped, kicking up dust before we shot away down the track. We drove until reaching the small police station, where I flew out of the Jeep and burst through its double doors. Perhaps a rash action in retrospect, but my mind was elsewhere. Before anything else, I had them call an ambulance for my friend, following by reporting a severe animal attack. When I was asked what attacked us, I spat out, "Cougar." The officer grunted, and I laid out the facts. Grandpa was gone, dragged away by our assailant. An ambulance arrived soon thereafter to pick up Martin. The EMTs were visibly surprised by the laceration, but attended to him nonetheless. He'd lost a fair bit of blood, but they quickly got him in stable condition at the nearest hospital, where he stayed for the next week. A search party banded together to look for Grandpa, but they found nothing, of course. I was questioned about the state of his house, but I think the trauma welling up in my eyes was the best defense I could have had. No scorch marks on the rubble to indicate explosives, nothing. It's been a few years since this all happened, and I've made it through the stages of grief in one piece. I'd like to say Grandpa lives on in my memory, but that wouldn't be entirely accurate to say. I can still remember him, our conversations, days out, the smell of his fireplace, all that. But no matter how hard I try, I can't remember what he looked like. That's to say, there's only an imperceptible smudge where he once was in any pictures I still have. I don't know where he ended up, some massive network of tubes, but I get the distinct impression that his grave lies elsewhere, in another place separate from this world. I'm eternally grateful for his sacrifice, yeah, but I can't help but think that it was only our lives that were saved from the scorestender. Are there more of them, or is it somehow able to relocate itself? Only my grandpa would have answers, but, yeah. Just in case, if you find yourself out in the wilderness and you see a steady plume of smoke rising from the trees, perhaps even smell the organic stench of digestion, it'd be best to call off the occasion entirely. Once it's on to you, well, I only hope you're as lucky as we were on the day my grandpa died. Third story. This story was shared by you/but they were gone. It's illegal to use Loveland Road. I know why. As I sat down to write this, I started to wonder how many of you may have passed through Alcon, Nebraska. I can't blame you if you don't remember. I'd wager I can count on two hands the number of visitors that stayed for more than a day in the whole time I've lived here. There's not much to do, or even look at really, with a population of 10,000 tops and 2 movie theaters, 1 high school, 1 McDonald's, and a baker's dozen or so of local restaurants between us. But, I've of course always had a bias for the place I grew up, so I'd indignantly defend any snide remarks made about Alcon. The people are nice, there's little crime, and the high school's got a good graduation rate. What's not to like? But now I can't urge all of you enough that if you pass Alcon while on a road trip or something, you need to keep driving. I know that the next town is a good ways away, but please, don't stop in Alcon. But if I can't convince you to tough out a bit more driving, at least listen to this: don't use Loveland Road. Growing up in a small town has advantages and disadvantages. An advantage is that if someone is in trouble, you can bet that a small army of neighbors would be there to help them. A disadvantage is that if someone is trouble, the whole goddamn populace knows about it. And I'm willing to bet that Mr. and Mrs. Samuel experienced the full force of both ends of this spectrum 2 years ago. Alexandra Samuel, their oldest daughter, went missing after going for a morning bike ride. She was a senior at the time, a grade above me, and I had talked to her once or twice. She was sweet and pretty, always wore dresses and had glasses. You can bet that the whole of Alcon knew by sundown. An incident like that was so alien to our community. Remember when I said there was little crime? Yeah, well, the worst thing before Alexandra was the suspected arson of an abandoned barn. Search parties got together. Posters were put up. It was all anyone talked about. There truly was no trace of where Alexandra had disappeared to. Then seemingly all at once the police called off the effort. Information about that case became suspiciously hard to get after that. Which of course only heightened interest. The only word from the police department after that was that the investigation was taken to a state level. Then radio silence. Things didn't change much in Alcon in the following weeks. The Samuels understandably moved shortly after and business bummed along as usual. There was, however, our town's little unsolved mystery bubbling under the surface. Oh, that, and people weren't allowed to drive on Loveland Road. I was surprised that more people didn't notice any correlation of those two events. Maybe it was just that nobody knew that the second one even happened. Heck, I only knew because my dad had a bad habit of announcing quite literally everything in the newspaper during breakfast every morning. Here it says Alcon Council just ordered Loveland Road closed. Ha! He said more to himself than us, half-interested eye skimming the paper. I asked my parents if they thought it had anything to do with Alexandra. All I got in response was that annoying parent, I don't know, act that really meant that they weren't up for thinking that morning. But for some reason, I couldn't let it go. That same day I brought it up to my friends and some of them shared my intrigue. Upon checking the paper for myself later, there was no reason actually listed for why Loveland Road was closed. In the paper itself, that is. As I recount this, it's almost eerie how things came together. In my English 3 class we were assigned a project to pick a recent news article or research it at the library. She made it very clear nobody was to do their project on Alexandra. I don't think anyone would have anyway. It was too real, too soon. Either way, I'm sure you can guess which little blurb of an article I chose. When I went to the library the following weekend to request any additional info about Loveland Road being closed, the librarian said that the article I already had was it. A bit taken back, I settled for any other articles in reference to the road. There was only one. 2 officers go missing while on manhunt. While in pursuit of Rick Smith, suspected of domestic abuse and assault of a police officer, Officers John Smith and John Jay followed an anonymous tip from a source in Alcon claiming to have seen him at a gas station. Smith and Jay responded to the call at 7:30 p.m. on June 8, informing their supervisor they were conducting a follow-up. When the officers arrived at the gas station, they spotted the suspect's vehicle fleeing the scene and radioed that they were pursuing and requested backup. The officers and suspect were last seen continuing the chase onto Loveland Road, when shortly after Officer J radioed in that, suspect has exited the vehicle, continuing pursuit on foot. This was the last known contact with either officer. Responders found both J and Smith's unattended cruiser and the suspect's vehicle at the scene. Alcon PD has stated that investigation and searches are ongoing for both the suspect and the officers. If you see this man. Obviously I replaced the names for anonymity. But the point stands that this only made me more unsettled and curious about Loveland Road. Upon showing the article to my friends, they seemed to share the sentiment. Which is when we decided to give a little visit to the street for ourselves. I know. Stupid. Horrendously stupid. But keep in mind you're reading this in the context of this no-sleep. If you were reading this anywhere else, you'd expect there was nothing, or at most, it was creepy. We just thought it'd make for an interesting story. So me and 3 of my friends went to hang out one Saturday and learn why it was illegal to use Loveland Road. As we went driving, we noted how distant the road actually was from the rest of Alcon, which is saying something. Long before we reached Loveland the road turned to gravel, and then to dirt. When we pulled onto the road in Trent's car, he was the only one of us who had his own. Sure enough, there was one of those wooden police barriers blocking the way with a bright orange sign reading, "Road closed." This didn't stop curious teenagers, of course. Little does. We pushed the barrier to the side, a tinge of excitement brewing in me, and we continued on. Getting further and further down the path, we noticed more and more signs indicating we weren't supposed to be there. These too predictably went ignored until we finally stopped and decided to look around. Loveland Road was totally covered on either side by dense woods. But since it was late November, most of the leaves had long fallen off and made everything seem gray and empty. Even though it was still daytime, I could see my breath in the air as I stepped out of the car. I didn't remember it being that chilly when we first left, but then again it was a long drive. We all began picking around, armed with bats, surveying the woods as if we might find something that the police had overlooked. I think we were excited simply by the fact that we weren't supposed to be here, not really expecting to find anything. But we did. After a while we all just started bullshitting around, talking while walking the length of the road, the novelty of the setting having worn off. We'd been out for about an hour and the sun was beginning to set, and even though we were bull-headed and fairly relaxed, no way were we going to stay on that road at night. We collectively turned around and began making our way back to Trent's car. That's when we heard the screaming. It was faint, really faint. Kyle stopped us though and made us listen. Somewhere, far away to our left, we could hear a throaty, frantic scream. Every few seconds it would stop, then pick up again at full force. I'd like to think the way we reacted was fairly rational. Trent took off running down the street. We began to chase after him when he called back to us, "I'm gonna grab my car. You guys go find them, I'm calling the police." The three of us took off towards the screaming, bats in hand. I guess at the time we all thought that there was a chance it could be Alexandra. Maybe she had gotten lost and only now got the strength to call for help. Maybe she had escaped from someone who'd taken her. None of us could have guessed the source of that sound. The screaming only got louder and more gurgly as we got closer, and I could feel myself begin to lose nerve. But Kyle and Mason kept trucking forward, so I did my best to steel myself and keep up. Any semblance of confidence we had was shattered when we turned into a small valley the scream echoed from. First I saw the man. He was bound at the wrist and ankles with this heavy rope. Encompassing the rest of his body was this crude-looking steel cage. The man was struggling against the machine he was trapped in, but every few moments the iron bars shifted, just a little, outwards. It was such a slight change. I actually heard something in him pop from where we were, followed by an anguishing screech. My eyes followed the framework of the machine against my will, along the man, to a crank, that was very slowly being turned, to a hand. Then I saw the rest of it. It was tall. Hideously, unnaturally tall. And thin. Its hollow, milky eyes met mine. It looked to be smiling, but the skin was so tight on its face I couldn't tell. Everything about it seemed stretched out. The limbs. The face. All except the clothes. All except a dirty, broken glasses and a tattered dress. We all ran. Never before have I felt such impending terror in my life. My lungs burned and I kept scraping my legs on branches and logs, but never once did we stop. Before my mind registered, I was even on the street we kept on running towards where Trent's car was parked. It had finally begun to get dark. Mason started shouting down the road, hoping Trent would hear us and hurry. After 5 minutes of a full sprint, my body finally trumped my fear. I slowed and crouched for a moment, trying in vain to catch my breath. Mason and Kyle stopped too, both breathing heavily and producing cell phones. The only words I could produce were, "Fucking fuck." As I buried my head in my hands. We all heard the faint moan at once. All of our eyes shooting back at once, we saw it standing in the middle of the street, looking at us. This one was even taller, scarcely covered in torn blue fabric. I pulled myself up and we sprinted straight into the trees in front of us. Knowing we couldn't run much longer, we tried to find a place to hide while Kyle dialed 911. Kyle and Mason both shimmied under a huge fallen log, and tried to make room for me. I knew I wouldn't fit. It's fine, I told them. There's a hollow tree here, just fucking hurry and get the cops. And with that I squeezed myself into the tree and clutched my bat close to me. I don't know how much time had passed, but it was much too long. The police should have reached us by now. I asked Kyle what 911 said in a hushed whisper, and he said the operator insisted someone was coming and he should stay off his phone. That didn't sound right at all, as most operators insist you stay on the line, but I didn't have long to consider this when I heard the heavy crunching of leaves. The time between steps was great. But each one was considerably closer. I tried to make myself small as possible as I swallowed back tears. Crunch. Silence. Crunch. Silence. Crunch. Silence. I wrenched my eyes open and slowly my eyes adjusted to the darkness outside of the rift in the tree. Two milky eyes. A pained smile. Torn blue fabric. The glint of a badge that read, John J. A loud humming, sweeping lights through the trees. I blacked out. Later, I learned that the police sent a helicopter to our location. Later, I learned this was because the road was unstable and prone to sinkholes. Later, I learned that Trent and his car were yet to be found and they suspect that he may have gone off-road and sunken into one. Later, I learned that the story never appeared in the news. I don't know what we saw on Loveland Road that night. I don't know what happened to Trent. And I don't know why Alexandra's story was covered while the police kept a tight lid on what happened to us. But what I do know is this. Why it's illegal to use Loveland Road. And why you should keep driving if you happen to pass by Alcon. Because while I was talking to my mom the other day, she told me something that resurfaced this old, horrible memory. Another road closed yesterday. Beaver Creek. Thanks a lot for watching the video till the end. Subscribe to our channel Horror in Detail. Drop your opinions/suggestions in the comments section, and like the video as it helps with the YouTube algorithm.